There we go. If everyone could take their seats, please. So, every year we like to try something just a bit different, add a slightly different twist to this event. And this year we're adding a cultural literary element to the Brussels Forum. It's my pleasure now to introduce the playwright, screenwriter, Tom Stoppard. Mr. Stoppard has written many famous plays. He has one in Broadway now, I think, Arcadia. He's very interesting person, and he's agreed to give a few remarks to kick off this morning's session. Tom Stoppard, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Believe me, I am conscious of this honor done me. I don't think that I've ever in my life addressed such a distinguished audience. I'm quite used to talking to students, for example, about theatre, and I'm somewhat overawed and astonished to find myself at this microphone. There's a point I want to make, and in order to make it, it's going to be necessary for me to speak about my own life a little bit, so forgive me for that indulgence. I was born Tomáš Straussler in Zlín, in Moravia, in present-day the Czech Republic, in July 1937. In my second year, with the approach of the Nazis, I and my brother and my parents, my father being a Jewish doctor working for Bata in Zlín, the four of us were translated, I suppose could be the word, to Singapore in good time for Pearl Harbor. And in my fourth year, my mother, my brother, and I, leaving our father behind, of course, women and children first, were on a boat bound for Australia. We got bombed around, and the boat ended up in Bombay, and I spent the war in India. My father having died at the hands of the Japanese, we found ourselves in India at the end of the war. My mother married a British Army officer whose name I now have. And he brought us, my mother, my brother, myself, he brought us to England, and I very shortly became an English schoolboy. Now, you may already have identified the point that I want to make. It is this: I've had a charmed life. As war and horrible things approached, I slipped away over the horizon. I slipped away from the camps where all four of my grandparents and my parents' siblings died. I remember vaguely the smell of sandbags in an air raid shelter in Singapore, and that was my war. And then we were on a boat. I had 4 very happy years of childhood in India, and then I found myself in Arcadia, in an English prep school in Derbyshire, in the country of Shakespeare and habeas corpus. In other words, from beginning to end of this journey, I was never in a place where freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and all the other curtailments of liberty were the norm. I realize I'm idealizing my early years and the places where I lived them. After all, I was in India, but I wasn't an Indian. There's various kinds of idealizations, but nevertheless, I ended up in a country where it seemed to me that the things which were wrong with the country I ended up in were deplorable, but they were acknowledged to be the abuses of the ideal. And I was getting involved on the margins of societies where such curtailments of liberty were not in fact abuses of the system. They were the system in perfect working order. And I had a sense of English superiority, though I was an adopted Englishman. I've always taken free expression, free assembly, free trade unions, democracy. I once read a comedy where some character said, it's not the voting that's democracy, it's the counting. I've always felt that I was in a place where all these things held good. And it occurs to me now that my life and the things I took for granted are a kind of embodiment of what you gentlemen and ladies might think to be the ideal European life now. This is really impossible, you know. I've used up half my time and I'm just thinking rapidly about how to say the things I want to say. I'm in England. In 1956, I'm a very happy junior newspaper reporter looking at events in Hungary from afar, fascinated not by the tanks and the Russians or the Hungarians, but by the British journalists covering the event, covering the news. In 1968, I remember feeling rather odd because I didn't feel personalized by the Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia. It just seemed regrettable, but I looked at it through an English sensibility problem in a faraway country. In 1977, I did, with a guy from Amnesty, go to Moscow and St. Petersburg for quite a short time, where there was an involvement with asylum, visa seekers being treated as psychiatric patients by the Soviet regime. I also went to Prague, where I first met the man who really, among living people, is my personal hero, Mr. Havel. And I was around in 1989 to celebrate what happened in 1989. So there you are. That was my charmed life. I think that the visits which I made to Minsk in 2005, where I went to meet an outlaw theatre group, ought to now come to the foreground of the very few minutes I have left to speak to you. This is what I want to say. The kind of things which I've been talking about, the kind of good luck I had, which in 2011 isn't supposed to be in Europe anybody's particular good luck. It's supposed to be what we all have managed to achieve for each and every one of us. I look around the map and there is this curious anomaly, isn't there? Really closer to Brussels than some of the other European capitals, we have a place where there's this leftover. The bad old days are here and now. And I know that many people in this room have been exercising their brains as much as they can and working the way that politics and diplomacy works to do something about Belarus. I'm personally somewhat bemused, fairly depressed, and probably more ineffective than anybody else here. It would be more polite to say less effective than anybody here. But quite honestly, how effective are we, if I may include myself in your number? The whole panoply of, band artists, every kind of restriction is reflected in Belarus. It is to my mind, it is not actually precisely a leftover of habits and ways of governance in the Soviet Empire at all. It's a really a rather curious hybrid. Until recently, people could come and go, and their whole flock of NGOs which were trying to support, which would not even have been on the agenda in the old days. Nevertheless, what is the reason? What is the reason that Belarus is actually a problem for us? I think part of it is that our own standards have slipped. You know, when I'm with Belarusians and also with friends in this room talking about it, one tends to fall into a way of speaking which suggests that everywhere in the EU we have utopia except Belarus. We don't have utopia. If I started describing a hypothetical country, which is not by any means without its corruptions, which is not without any means without its media monopolies, you'd have to just choose which country I'm thinking of, because there's more than one. I'm not excluding my own. In other words, when I say our standards have slipped, I'm not really talking about our morality slipping. I think that our sense of what is appropriate has just shifted, and it's shifted in the wrong direction. Until finally, a place which is really bad like Belarus isn't in quite sharp enough contrast to our own countries. I think that's one thing which perhaps ought to be brought back to mind. I don't think, I'm not a diplomatist, a politician, and I've got to wind up. I'm a playwright. In other words, I deal in morality. I mean, there are all kinds of plays, and I love the ones which are French farces, but artists, we deal in moralities. That's what art is. It's a matrix for the moral sensibility. If you want to change something by Tuesday, you should do a television documentary. I approve of it. I admire it. If you want to change the way we think, you have to write, if you can, a great novel. You have to do art. It might be music, it might be painting. This is what we do. And to presume on that platform, I would say that most of the energy which gets dispersed in trying to deal with anomalies in Europe is the energy that is used in looking after self-interest. Naturally, it's the game, isn't it? It's the game of foreign policy. You look after your own interests and you ameliorate other places' conditions when they are in accord with your own greater, larger strategic interests. Perhaps it's unwise, perhaps it's impractical, perhaps it's naive, perhaps it's just silly to hope that people like you can throw all that away and understand what you don't need to understand because you already know it. The way life gets better is through a contest, a competition of generosity. I'm very interested in, I fell into the English language, bless it, and one of the nice things in the English language is the word kind or kindly, to behave kindly. It relates to kin, family. We all understand what's going on here. There's a connection between these things. You're at dinner, there's one piece of meat left. Yes, I'm stopping, don't worry, sir. And you're saying, no, you have it, because it's your son, it's your brother, it's your cousin, it's your uncle. No, I want you to have the last piece of meat. This is kinship. If one can extend that to the people living next door, you've already made some progress. If you can extend it to your fellow villagers, that is huge progress. How do you extend it to each other when you represent so many different countries? It's an impossible grail. It's an impossible hope. But really, our only survival as good people, rather than cattle, is to live in that hope and just fight for it and fail and fight again. Thank you so much for your attention.